The sun rose gently over Ouagadougou, spreading its golden light across the heart of Burkina Faso. The city was awake, bustling with markets, school children, and farmers carrying baskets filled with the fruits of their labor. But beneath this everyday rhythm of life, a quiet transformation was taking place. At its center stood Ibrahim Traoré, the young leader whose name had now become a symbol of both defiance and hope. The last time we left his story, he had already captured the imagination of his people with his boldness, his unshakable faith in Burkina Faso's dignity, and his courage to stand against foreign interference. But leadership is never defined in a single moment. It is tested in the months and years that follow. And as Traoré settled into his role, he knew that his mission had only just begun. The wounds of conflict still scarred Burkina Faso. Entire villages had been displaced by insurgencies, children had been orphaned, and mothers cried for sons who never returned home. While the immediate challenge of security remained, Traoré realized that true leadership meant more than fighting battles. It meant healing a nation that had endured too much pain. He began with the simplest, yet most powerful step: listening. In the countryside, he sat on woven mats with elders, hearing their wisdom. In schools, he spoke with students about their dreams. In refugee camps, he listened to mothers who longed for food, shelter, and dignity. Traoré's presence was not that of a distant ruler. It was that of a son of the soil, one who carried the same dust on his hands as his people. This compassion soon transformed into action. Under his guidance, Burkina Faso launched community rebuilding, programs aimed at restoring displaced villages. Families were given land, tools, and seeds to begin farming again. Engineers were mobilized to rebuild wells, ensuring that no community would go without clean water. And in schools, new programs were initiated to ensure that even in the shadow of war, children would never be denied the right to learn. One mother in a rural camp recalled the day Traoré visited. He came with no army, no guns. He sat with us, ate our food, and promised us that this land will smile again. And for the first time in years, I believed. As weeks turned to months, the world began to take notice. Here was a man barely in his mid-30s, governing a nation scarred by conflict, yet choosing humility over grandeur. In a continent where leaders often clung to power through fear, Traoré stood apart. But he was not naive. He knew that Burkina Faso's survival depended on more than speeches and compassion. It demanded bold reforms. He began by tackling corruption, that age-old disease which had drained the nation for decades. Ministers and officials who had grown fat on the suffering of the people found themselves face to face with a leader who would not tolerate theft. For the first time in years, the people saw corrupt figures removed from power and made accountable for their actions. In their place, Traoré appointed young, energetic leaders, men and women who shared his vision for a new Burkina Faso. Some were farmers, some teachers, others former activists. They were not polished politicians, but they carried something more valuable: a deep connection to the people. Leadership, Traoré once said in a televised address, is not about titles or age. It is about service. If you cannot serve your people, you do not deserve your position. What set Ibrahim apart was not only his fight against corruption, or his bold defiance of external pressures. It was his unwavering dedication to humanitarian work. He launched food security initiatives, ensuring that no Burkinabe would go hungry. Farmers were supported with new tools, seeds, and cooperative structures to boost agricultural production. Local markets flourished, and gradually, villages that had once been dependent on aid began to sustain themselves. In healthcare, mobile clinics were dispatched to rural areas where no doctor had been seen for years. Children received vaccinations, mothers were provided safe maternal care, and old men with tired eyes finally found relief in medicine. He invested in education, not only by building schools, but also by rethinking what was taught. History lessons began to include the proud heritage of the Mossi kingdoms and the legacy of African heroes. For Traoré, education was not only about literacy, it was about dignity and identity. His efforts bore fruit. Within a short span, the spirit of hopelessness that once clouded the nation began to lift. People started to believe again, not in promises, but in visible change. Politics in Burkina Faso had long been a theater of power struggles, foreign meddling, and empty words. Traoré sought to rewrite that script. He introduced local governance councils where community leaders, women, and youth could directly participate in decision-making. No longer would decisions be made only in the capital. The voices of villages would now shape the nation's future. This shift was radical. For the first time, rural farmers in Kaya, young students in Bobo Dioulasso, and artisans in Koudougou felt that their voices mattered. Democracy was no longer an imported slogan. It was lived, shared, and felt. Traoré's political philosophy became clear. True sovereignty meant not just freedom from foreign powers, but freedom from the chains of silence. His people had to speak, and he was determined to listen. Of course, not everyone celebrated his rise. Powerful interests beyond Africa's borders grew uneasy. Here was a young leader who spoke fearlessly about African unity, self-reliance, and resistance against exploitation. Yet, even as critics painted him as reckless, his charisma drew admiration across the continent. From Dakar to Kinshasa, from Bamako to Nairobi, young Africans saw in him a reflection of their own frustrations and their own dreams. Student groups held rallies carrying his portrait. Social media echoed with his speeches. Even in distant villages, griots sang songs of the Lion of Burkina Faso, the leader who reminded them of Thomas Sankara. And through it all, Traoré remained grounded. He often repeated to his advisors, "We are not here to be praised by the world. We are here to serve the barefoot child, the hungry farmer, the woman carrying water under the sun. If we succeed in that, history will take care of itself." By the end of his first year in leadership, Burkina Faso was not yet free of challenges. The insurgencies had not vanished. The economy still bore scars, and foreign powers continued to exert pressure. But something profound had shifted. The people believed in themselves again. This was perhaps Ibrahim Traoré's greatest achievement. Not a single project or reform, but the rebirth of hope. For a nation long silenced by poverty, corruption, and war, hope was the most powerful weapon of all. As he stood before a crowd in Ouagadougou one evening, under a sky bursting with stars, he said, "Burkina Faso is not a poor nation. We are rich in courage, in faith, in dignity. Our riches have been stolen, our lands exploited, but our spirit has never been broken. And as long as that spirit lives, we will rise again." The crowd erupted, their voices carrying into the night, and in that moment one could feel the pulse of a new Burkina Faso, fragile, yet unyielding. The story of Ibrahim Traoré was still unfolding. His journey had only just begun. The wind that swept across the Sahel carried more than dust and heat. It carried whispers of change. In Burkina Faso, the young leader, Ibrahim Traoré, was no longer just the president of a troubled nation. He was becoming the voice of a continent yearning for freedom. His story was no longer confined within the borders of his homeland. From the crowded streets of Bamako to the universities of Lagos, his name was spoken with reverence and hope. Traoré's speeches had always echoed the spirit of Thomas Sankara, but now they began to resonate on a larger scale. He spoke of a united Africa, not in theory, but in urgent, practical terms. "Our enemies are not our neighbors," he declared in a gathering of West African youth. "Our enemies are hunger, poverty, and exploitation. We must stand together, or we will continue to fall divided." These words were not empty slogans. Under his leadership, Burkina Faso joined hands with Mali and Niger to form a new alliance, an African coalition for security and sovereignty. The three nations, long battered by insurgency and foreign control, pledged to defend one another, share resources, and chart their own path forward. This alliance was a turning point. For decades, West African nations had depended on foreign troops and aid to survive. Now, for the first time, they were building their own collective strength. Traoré believed that only through solidarity could Africa reclaim its dignity. But Pan-African unity was not his only mission. On the international stage, Ibrahim Traoré carried himself with a rare blend of humility and firmness. He did not bow to global powers, yet he did not shut the door on dialogue. In one memorable summit, when pressed by international leaders about Burkina Faso's decisions to reduce foreign military presence, Traoré stood tall and replied, "We are not rejecting friendship. We are rejecting dependency. There is a difference." These words, spoken with quiet conviction, captured the world's attention. Some criticized him as defiant, others praised him as courageous. But for the people of Burkina Faso, it was simple. Their leader was speaking with their voice. He also reached out to non-traditional allies, strengthening ties with nations willing to engage on equal terms. New trade agreements were signed, focusing on fair exchange rather than exploitation. Agricultural products, minerals, and local crafts began to find new markets, slowly reshaping the economy. Traoré understood that political freedom meant little without economic independence. To achieve this, he launched initiatives that went far beyond immediate relief. Farmers were empowered through cooperative models, ensuring they had access to markets and could negotiate fair prices. Programs encouraged local production of food staples to reduce reliance on imports. Solar power projects began to spread across rural areas, lighting up villages that had remained in darkness for generations. The Sahel sun, once seen as a curse, was now being harnessed as a blessing. Small-scale industries were supported, from textile weaving to food processing. Traoré believed that development should not only be measured in skyscrapers and foreign investment, but in the empowerment of everyday people. Though progress was slow, the vision was clear. Burkina Faso would no longer be a land exploited for its resources while its people remained poor. Instead, its wealth would nourish its own citizens first. While politics and economics captured headlines, Traoré never lost sight of the human soul of his mission. He often reminded his ministers that leadership was not about policies alone, but about compassion lived daily. New housing projects were developed for displaced families, not as temporary shelters, but as permanent homes. Programs for women's empowerment were expanded, providing training, microloans, and leadership opportunities. Education reforms continued, with scholarships for talented youth to study both locally and abroad, on the condition that they would return to serve their homeland. One of his most moving initiatives was the Children of the Sahel program, aimed at providing education and healthcare to orphans of conflict. Each child was not only given shelter and schooling, but was paired with mentors who guided them with love and discipline. An old woman in Ouagadougou once said, "In Ibrahim, I see not just a president, but a father to the orphan and a brother to the poor." But leadership is never without trials. His bold stance brought him enemies, both within and outside Burkina Faso. Old elites, threatened by his reforms, plotted to undermine him. Foreign powers sought to pressure him through sanctions and propaganda. Insurgencies, though weakened, still haunted the countryside, testing the resilience of his security forces. Each attack reminded him that the road to peace was long and steep. Yet through every storm, Traoré's resolve seemed to grow stronger. He once told his closest allies, "If I must fall, I will fall standing with my people. But if I live, it will only be to see them free." These words captured the essence of his journey. A man unafraid of sacrifice, willing to bear the weight of a nation's struggle on his shoulders. Perhaps his greatest legacy was the spark he lit among African youth. From Senegal to Kenya, student unions invited speakers to discuss his vision. Young people, long disillusioned by corruption and foreign domination, found new energy in his example. Songs were written, murals painted, poems recited, all celebrating the idea that Africa could rise on its own terms. In universities across the continent, a new phrase echoed, "If Traoré can, why not us?" This movement extended beyond politics. It inspired artists, entrepreneurs, and thinkers to reclaim their identity, to believe that Africa was not destined to be a shadow, but could shine its own light. As the years passed, Ibrahim Traoré remained humble. He continued to wear his simple military uniform, lived modestly, and spent more time in villages than in grand offices. His leadership was not about creating a cult of personality, but about nurturing a culture of dignity and self-reliance. In one of his later speeches, he told the people, "Do not wait for one man to save you. I am only a servant, a messenger. The true strength of Burkina Faso lies in you. Its farmers, its workers, its youth. If you rise, the nation rises. If you stand firm, no empire can bend us." The crowd that day erupted in thunderous applause, not because of empty promises, but because they knew he meant every word. The story of Ibrahim Traoré was far from over. His journey was still unfolding, with challenges ahead and victories yet to be won. But one truth was undeniable. He had awakened something powerful in his people. Burkina Faso was no longer seen as a weak, forgotten nation. It had become a symbol of courage. And Ibrahim, its young leader, stood as living proof that vision, humility, and determination could shape history. The story of Ibrahim Traoré was not just the story of a man, but of a people rising from the ashes of hardship to claim their rightful place under the sun.